Well, for more on Japan's economy, let's bring in Ed Rogers from Tokyo. He's the CEO at Rogers Investment Advisors. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, Ed, how are the industries that were most impacted by Fukushima faring at the moment?
Well, there are two ways to look at this question. One is obviously the immediate impact in the localized area, which obviously was devastating, and we do see rebuilding. But we're really primarily talking about a fishing community or communities along the coast. The far greater impact, frankly, has been to the nuclear power industry in Japan. We have still only a fraction of the remaining nuclear power plants have come back online from the 54 that were functioning prior to the disaster. And it's really a very legitimate question to ask if there ever really will be a nuclear industry, power industry in Japan again. And that's where the real impact has come as far as the economy is concerned.
And speaking of that, we know that the nuclear contamination is still a problem, and we know that there are still ongoing concerns about getting some of the melted fuel out of the reactors. So given all the unknowns that still remain, what is all this doing to the energy industry?
Well, first of all, the people of Japan are fairly clear in their desire to not see nuclear power plants get turned back on. There's a huge amount of mistrust of the government. There's a huge amount of mistrust regarding TEPCO, the power companies that run the nuclear generators. So well over 50% of the country is in favor of just basically keeping the lights off. Don't turn the nuclear plants back on, and finding alternative sources of energy. That's very impactful. But as you stated earlier in the program, we've had 4 straight quarters of positive GDP growth. We seem to have overcome the issue of energy in and of itself, but as a sector, nuclear power remains very much in question here in Japan.
Now, given that people are perhaps obviously more reluctant about nuclear energy, are there any other industries that are perhaps benefiting then from the fallout of this disaster?
Yes. Well, immediately you'd think about alternative energy sources such as solar power, hydropower. I think solar is probably the most actively pursued in Japan. There are solar farms that have been created in the wake of Fukushima. There's a very active government program to subsidize these other forms of energy because it was clearly needed. It was always apparent that it was going to be very problematic to turn back on 54 nuclear power plants. The nuclear industry here, it's very aged. The average lifespan of a nuclear power plant is about 40 years, and the average life of most of the existing nuclear power plants in Japan is over 30 years. So it's a very legitimate question to ask whether it's even worth turning them ever back on again, and is it worth building any new ones? So and it seems that the answer is probably no in both cases.
So with that being said then, you mentioned TEPCO. What's the outlook for this company given the surrounding circumstances?
Well, it's very challenged. Right now, obviously, they receive significant government subsidies. They are maintenance of nuclear power plants must go on. You either decide to decommission them and turn them off entirely, or you're maintaining them. And right now, I think there are, I could be wrong in this number, but approximately 24 plants that have still applied to be turned back on again. So you can't, it's not like a light switch in a room where you turn it off and you walk away and the room's just dark. There still need to be technicians and people managing these plants. You can't simply turn off the lights and walk away. That's not the way nuclear power works. So there's an ongoing cost, if you will, to maintenance and upkeep, even if we're not getting any energy out of the plants. Eventually that needs to be resolved.
Now, despite a lot of the ongoing costs, we know that the economy is still progressing despite that. So what is it doing? What's really working in the economy that's allowing that growth to continue?
Well, a lot of things are working in the economy. Again, if you were to sort of look at the top-down numbers, you now have 1.4 jobs for every applicant. Think about that. That's a staggering number. 1.4 jobs for every possible applicant. It essentially means completely full employment in Japan. Everybody who wants a job gets a job. Might not be exactly the job you want, but you've effectively reached zero unemployment. Other data, such as exports, supported by a weakening yen, are indications that the long-term and medium-term prospects, even the short-term prospects for Japanese businesses are very, very strong in many sectors.
Well,
machine tools, cars, auto parts. We could go down a very long list of where you'd want to put your money.
I'm sure that's very welcome news, despite obviously the ongoing fallout from the tragedy. We'll have to leave it there. Ed Rogers, CEO at Rogers Investment Advisors.